Good morning, Rabbi Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Berachot, and we are on page 25a, Kaf He Amud Aleph, smack in the middle of the page, 13 lines down from where the lines first widen, and the Limud of Amud Yomi for Chodesh Elul has been sponsored by Justin and Sarah Rabbi for the health and prosperity of Sarah Rahel Bat Nora and Ezra Haim Ben Devorah, that should have Refuah Shelema, and also is co-sponsored by Dr. Aaron and Shalin Kahen for the health, happiness, and success of their children, and Leilui Nishmat Nisan Ben Moshe HaKohen, that his neshama may have an aliyah. Amen. We're by two dots. The line starts with lo, and there's immediate two dots right afterwards. Itmar is still speaking about what's considered erva and what things you cannot say Shema next to. And today's daf basically primarily is going to be speaking about excrement. So very, very exciting Gemara. So Itmar, so Overet, Abaye Amar Mutar Likrot Kriyat Shema, Rava Amar Asur. So we spoke already about the pasuk that says Ve'aya Bachanecha Kadosh, that your camp, your encampment, your camp around you, your immediate surrounding has to be Kadosh. And hence you cannot have Tzoah next to you when you say Divrei Torah, when you say Shema, and so on and so forth. That we already established, right? So the Gemara asks, so wait a second, how about if I am stationary, I'm staying somewhere, and the Tzoah is passing? This is really very relevant, because as we mentioned before, you have a little kid in diaper, and you're sitting and benching, and all of a sudden, you see, like, and you look back, you see, okay, the kid is running you by. Is that mutar to continue? Is that not mutar to continue? You're davening, and you see someone is bringing avichel meraglaim, right? You have this like plastic potties, and someone is running with a plastic potty to take it to empty it in the bathroom. You have to stop saying Shema. Or do you say, well, you know, my camp is good, just so I is going passing by, or maybe I should be able to say it, right? So this is going to be a machloket Abaye and Rava. Abaye is going to say it's completely fine. Rava is going to say no way, Shmei is not going to be okay at all, right? And Abaye is going to have very interesting proof from something completely random, which is going to be actually very beautiful. Says the Gemara. Amar Abaye says, Abaye Amar Mutar Likrot Kriyat Shema, Rava Amar Asur. Amar Abaye says, Mena Minala. How do I know this, that is Mutar? Ditnan, because we learned in the Mishnayot, Hatame Omed, Tachat Ha'ilan, V'hatahor Over, Tameh. If you have, this is the halachot of Negaim of Mesorah. If you have someone that has Sarat, you know, again, loosely we translate leprosy, which is not true really, but someone that has Sarat and is passing, Sarat has a very special halacha that is like a dead body, a corpse. As I'll say, four are like like dead, nechshavin, chashuvin kemet, one of them is Sarat. But Sarat is not just figuratively compared to dead body, but it literally in a level of tum'ah is also compared to corpse in such way that if you are under the same ceiling with a mesorah, you become tameh. That's the halacha. Now the Mishnah says, how about if you are in a temporary situation under the same ceiling? In other words, you're standing under a tree and a mesorah comes passing under the tree as well. And how about the reverse? The mesorah is under the tree, and you're passing under the tree. What's the halacha by each one of them? Are they the same halacha? The Mishnah says no. Says the Mishnah, Hatameh omed tachat ha'ilan. If the mesorah is standing stationary under the ilan, under the tree, and you, the tahor, are passing through, and you pass under that shade of the same tree, V'hatahor over, then tameh. The punctuation is important here. It's kind of confusing, but that's how it is. V'hatahor over, kama tameh, period. That the tahor becomes tameh. Tahor omed, but the reverse case. If tahor omed tachat ha'ilan, if you, the tahor, the pure guy, that's not mesorah, standing stationary under the ilan, under the tree, and now the mesorah is passing through, but tameh ober, kamam, and tameh is the one that's passing, then tahor. Then the tahor remains tahor. Even though that when you take the picture as a photographer, the moment that they're both under the tree is the same. But nevertheless, the Mishnah says one is tahor, one is tameh. Now we're going to get to why exactly that is, but says the Mishnah, ve'im amat tameh, but if the mesorah who's passing through would stand for a second, would pause for a second to say shalom aleichem to this guy, the guy's gonna yell, says, oy vavoy, now he became tameh, right? If he becomes a stationary even for a moment, then the tahor becomes tameh. This is not only a halacha by a mesorah per se, the person that's a mesorah, but it's a halacha also by an even hamenugat, by the stone that has nega sarat as well. In other words, we know that 3 items could have mesorah. It could be on your begadim, on your garments. It could be on yourself. It could be on your house. So when you are at some point, you're going to destroy those stones of the house and take them out of the machaneh. So imagine if someone is carrying this stone to put it outside the machaneh. So the guy himself is tahor, or is not mesorah, right? And you're taking this stone under the tree. If a tahor is there and you pause, that guy becomes tameh, right? The tum'at ohel is not limited to the person that has mesorah, that is a leper, that has leprosy, but also to the stone of the house that had leprosy, and now you're getting rid of it. Okay, so it says Abaye, you see from here that when you're passing through, the halachot of tumah doesn't apply. So here is the same thing. He brings raya from something in the gaim, right? Here also, if you are passing with the excrement, with the avid shel meraglayim, with the tzoah, with the dirty diaper, the guy is staying there. His machaneh is kadosh. You could say Shema, continue to say Shema. He doesn't have to stop. That was the raya of Abaye. Anyone likes the raya so far? Yeah, you'll be disappointed. So says the Gemara. Ve'im amat tameh bechen be'ever hamenugat ve'rava amar. Rava says, wait a second. Hatam bekiviuta talyamil. This is what kind of comparison in the world is that? There, bekiviuta talyamil. The topic of tum'ah has to do with tum'ah overet, is a specific halacha relating to tum'ah v'tahara. So there is a halacha that if you don't have kiviut by mesorah, it's not tameh, because the pasuk says it like that. The pasuk says, dichtiv badad yeshev michutz lamachane moshavo. It says the mesorah should sit alone outside the encampment of the Jews. Michutz lamachane moshavo. Outside the camp is his moshav. He says it again. You just told me badad yeshev. So what's moshavo? It's coming to tell you that the tum'ah transfers only when he is stationary. So you have a specific limud, you have a specific learning out from the pasuk about the mesorah, that the mesorah does not transmit his tum'ah through tum'at ohel if he's not stationary. It says it in the pasuk. How in the world are you learning that to tzoah? By kriyat shema, it says v'haya machanecha kadosh. Your machaneh should be kadosh. Anything at all times in your encampment, immediate surrounding, which is 4 amot diameter, not diameter, 4 amot radius, right, should be completely kadosh tahor. So if a tzoah is coming to my machaneh, to my 4 amot, who cares if it's stationary or not stationary? For that moment, my machaneh is not kadosh. How in the world are you comparing apples and oranges, says Rabbi? Which is now that he says it, you're like, oh yeah, gee, of course, right? And that's the halacha. Halacha is like Rava, not like Abaye. The machanecha kadosh has to be at all times, and there's no comparison really with negaim. So says the Gemara. let's just read this through. We went ahead. Over there by leprosy, you have to have a stationary tameh in order for tumat sarat to be transmitted through ohel. As the pasuk says, "Batad yeshev michus machane moshavo." From the word moshavo, that he's sitting there, you learn that it has to be a stationary because you already said yeshev. Why do you need moshavo? It's extra. It's coming to teach you that. Hacha, by saying kriyat shema in the vicinity of excrement, it says v'haya machanecha kadosh, that your encampment has to be clean. And over here, it's not. V'haya machanecha kadosh amar Rachmana. Hashem said, v'haya machanecha kadosh v'haleka. And here, you don't have it for those few moments that this so'ah is passing you by. 2 dots. Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Papa. Amar Papa, pi chazir ke so'ah overeta. You have a case that is equivalent to so'ah overet, to passing excrement, and that is pi chazir, a mouth of a pig. Why? Because pigs, the reason that someone is dirty, you say it's a pigsty, or you see he is like a PIG, is because the pig is very dirty. And they're always with their nose, they're going through garbage and excrement to find things to eat, and they pretty much eat everything. And therefore, the mouth of chazir is always dirty. So because it's always dirty, it's like a bathroom, basically. So says the Gemara, what's the chidush? We know that already. Pshita, it was so pashut for them. I don't know how many pigs they had running around back in the time. But the Gemara says, was pashut. What's even the chidush, right? Why do you even have to say it? They're always dirty in the garbage, and they're always carrying with them some remnants of excrement on them. So what's the chidush? Says the Gemara, lo tzricha. You know what the chidush is? Even though that the pig just said L'Shem Yichud and went to mikveh and came out of the river, it just took a bath basically, right? And it comes out like shiny, sparkly, like the actual pink things that they showed, as if it's the cleanest thing in the world, right? It's mamash clean, just came out of river. Still, even though that it has zero excrement on it, it's completely clean. Someone scrubbed it 2 minutes ago, still is us. Why? The reason is because we have a concept of avit shel meraglayim. We're going to actually have it right now. If something is miyuchad, if something is designated for excrement that always has excrement on it, even if you wash it and clean it, and now it's sparkling, shiny, sitting there, still it is asur to say Kriyat Shema in front of it, because this thing is always carrying excrement on it. So I would say that's only
like a toilet.
Like a toilet. It's exactly like a toilet, right? So I would say, by the way, this does happen. Someone, you don't realize, if you don't actually learn the halachot well, you don't realize when it comes Nogea. We were somewhere and they were changing their toilets, and I was giving a shiur in their house, and they excused themselves that they're whatever, it was broken, it was clogged, and they were putting the new fancy Toto toilet. But then in the middle of the shiur, the worker is taking the toilet out. So you have to stop the shiur, of course, because that is basically like a bathroom passing you by. Usually bathrooms don't pass you by, but unless they're changing that is actually something to be mindful of, because that's like avit shel meraglayim, basically, aside from the fact that perhaps it had something in the trap inside the way the system of it works. Usually you don't get rid of all the water over there anyways, but nevertheless.
What about a brand new toilet?
Brand new toilet is nothing, it's hazmana. We're going to get to that sugya a little bit later, but that's hazmana. It's something that's made for it, but has not been really used, so that's fine.
If there's a mechitza, like an airplane, and you're driving right outside the toilet, and the toilet's closed, can you say Shema?
Okay, that is, the short answer is yes.
Even though the door is probably going to may open while you're saying.
So when they open it, then you have to stop, if you're facing it.
The 4 amot doesn't play there because of the mechitza.
That's correct. So says the Gemara, The chidush is therefore that even though that the pig was just cleaned in the river, still is going to be asur. So says the Gemara, what do you do with if you have a safek? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, safek so'a asura, safek meraglayim mutarin. If you're in a place and you have safek, you have a doubt whether or not you have so'a here. Now you're not smelling anything necessarily, but saying maybe there is so'a, maybe there's not so'a. So you have to be machmir. By safek meraglayim, if you have safek, if you have doubt whether or not there is a bucket of meraglayim there, then you could be mekel. What's the difference? Both of them are human excrement, so to speak, right? Human waste. So says the Gemara, Ika de Amri, Amar Rav Yehuda, safek so'a bebayit muteret. There are those who said it a little bit differently. That safek so'a bebayit muteret. If you're in the house, which house is usually clean, so if you have safek about so'a in the house, whether or not the place is clean of excrement, then you could be lenient and say Shema without even going and checking every corner of the house. But in the garbage, usually you do have excrement in the garbage, and therefore, if you have safek of so'a in the ashpa, you have to be machmir, you have to be stringent. Safek meraglayim afilu ba'ashpa nami mutarin. And then the leniency by meraglayim, by urine, is that if you have safek, whether or not in the garbage you have urine, that you could assume that you don't have it, and then go ahead and say kriyat, right? Says the Gemara. Savarlah ki hada Rav Hamnuna. What's the difference between urine and excrement? Says the Gemara, he holds like Rav Hamnuna. Da'amar Rav Hamnuna, that Rav Hamnuna taught, lo asra Torah ela kedeged amud bilvad. That by urine, from the Torah, it's only when you have the actual urinating, and you have the silon, you have the actual stream of the flow of urine coming out of a person. But that is minat Torah. That is biblical. Outside of that, if you have a bucket of meraglayim, that is considered only midarabanan asur, not midoraita, and hence safek darabanan lekula. When you have a doubt in rabbinic law, you could be lenient. But so'a v'aya machanecha kadosh, that the Torah says, that really is talking about the so'a, that even after it's out of the body, still is considered a biblical level of lack of kedusha, and therefore, if you have safek, whether or not you have so'a, you have to be machmir because safek d'oraita lechumra. So that's the differentiating factor between so'a and meraglayim. Okay.
What if you're walking in the street and people let their dogs poop on the grass, and you want to say Tehillim as you walk? Are you allowed to or not?
So we actually had this before. The two braitas in the Gemara, whether so'at kelavim is asur or not. So the first braita said that it is. The second one said no. So'at kelavim is only asur when you're processing parchment inside, and that becomes really, really disgusting. So that's the Gemara said that's the halacha, without getting into the too much of the discrepancy and the details of the halacha. That seems to be something that if he doesn't smell bad, at least you have something to rely on. So says the Gemara. Rabbi Yonatan, and this is following the psak of Rabbi Yonatan that he has taught us as a question. Rami Ktiv, he asked the question, Ktiv, in one place the pasuk says in Dvarim v'yat tiyelecha michutz tamachane v'yatzata shama chutz. In pasuk in Dvarim, in one place it says that you should have a shovel, you go out v'yatzata shama chutz. It doesn't say that you have to cover anything of your waste, but later on in the same chapter, next pasuk literally says, "V'yatet yelecha ala zenecha." You should have a shovel. V'haya b'shiftecha chutz. When you go outside the machaneh to do your bodily needs, v'chafarta ba, you shall dig with that small shovel. You do your thing, and then you have to cover your excrement. So says the Gemara, basically, Rabbi Yonatan asked, wait a second. In the first pasuk, he says nothing about covering anything. There are two pasukim about using the bathroom. Now, they happen to be back-to-back, the pasukim, but you have to still ask yourself, why do you need two pasukim? The first one says nothing about covering your excrement or your waste. The second one says, oh, you have to cover it. Why in the world do you need two pasukim? Just tell me the second pasuk if you want to tell me that you have to cover it. Why do you have a first pasuk altogether? And if you have two pasukim, why do they have a discrepancy that the first one doesn't talk about covering anything and the second one does? You have to understand the need and the actual tochen content of the two pasukim back to back. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yonatan asked this question. Uchtiv, the second pasuk says, that you have to cover your excrement. So Rabbi Yonatan asks, how does this work, these two pasukim? The first one is speaking about ktanim, of urine, and that's why there is no need for covering it. It's going to be absorbed. And second one is talking about the covering of excrement, of tzo'ah, and therefore, in that case, you have to dig and you have to cover. So Alma, so you see from here, says Rabbi Yonatan, Ketanim lo asra Torah ela keneged amud bilvad. You see from here that when the ketanim are already let out of the body, you don't need to cover them. That's mutar from the Torah when they're out. Only the Torah. So why is the Torah concerned? Because the Torah only answered when the actual urinating is happening. So says the Gemara, Hanaful, no. Well, when they already are on the ground, no, it's not from the biblical level, it's not asur. And says the Gemara, Hanaful le'ara ashadi, v'rabananu degazru behu. If you have a bucket of meraglaim of urine from the Torah, that's mutar to say Shema right sitting next to it. No problem. It's only rabbinic that they made an enactment for kavod of tefillah that you should not be saying Shema next to avit shel meraglaim, next to a urine. V'chigazru ba'u rabanan bevada'an aval besefekan lo gazru. And when Chachamim said that you should not say Shema in front of urine, they said it only when you know that there is urine for sure, vadai. For sure there is urine, but safek l'Rabbanan, lekula. The safek of divrei Chachamim is lekula. Says the Gemara, uvevada'an ad kama. So fine, the Gemara says we accept that. Kibalnu mestirat v'moda'ah. But now, what is exactly the level of considered vadai? If you have urine and it's kind of absorbed already in the ground, is that asur? Is that mutar? And this happens a lot when you go again camping and you have a bunch of boys running around, and then you're saying Shema, and you notice there's this corner that somebody has done something there, and it's still wet. Right? You can see the rishumonika still, the mark of it is there. Is that asur to say Shema? I come tomorrow morning. I know that my son yesterday used this area. Is that asur to say Shema in that area tomorrow morning? It all dried. How about 5 minutes later? No? Yes, no? Right? What's the level, says the Gemara? Where do you draw the line? Just did it, it's half absorbed, it's completely absorbed, it's wet, it's this much wet. That the Gemara is going to speak about that. This is going to be the primary thing right now, says the Gemara. Until when? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Kol zman shel matbichin. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, so long as they're wet. What does it mean, matbichin? Matbichin means if you touch it with something, that thing becomes wet, right? So if it's completely absorbed in the ground, even though you can see the mark of it, it will be mutar. But if it's so wet that still it gives the wetness out to anything that you touch it with, then it's already considered urine sitting in front of you, and that is asur. Says the Gemara, V'cher Amar Rabba Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Barachana said the same thing in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, calls them matbichin, anytime that they're wet to make something else wet. V'cher Amar Ula, and same thing said Ula, calls them matbichin. Now, Geniva argued with this. Geniva said in the name of Rav, So long as you can see the mark, still is asur, said Geniva. So the Gemara does not take this well. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef, Hashem should be mochel Geniva for saying such a wrong thing. Completely wrong. Hashtat so'ah, because he perhaps is miscoding his Rabbi Rav. He's coding his Rebbe Rav, right? It's Geniva in the name of Rav. So Rav Yosef says he must be miscoding Rav. Hashem should be mochel him, right? Because you should learn this Kal Vachomer from So'ah. Hashtat So'ah Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Kemash Karmu Panea Mutar. Even by excrement, Rav said if already the top of it, the surface of it is drying out, is already mutar. So you're telling me that urine, if it's completely absorbed in the ground, you just could see the wetness, that's asur? What kind of thing is that? Should be kal vachomer from the actual excrement. Meraglayim ibaya, you need to even say meraglayim that if it's absorbed in the ground, even though that you can see the mark, still should be mutar. Abaya said to Rabbi Yosef, said, don't get too excited. I'll explain to you that by so'ah is machloket by itself as well. In other words, by excrement, you brought one braita that if the top layer of it becomes a little dry, it's already mutar. That's not according to everybody, says Abaye. My chazit is samchadaha. Who told you to rely on this braita? There's another braita. It's machloket tanaim about excrement. Semoch aha, rely on the other one. The Amar Rabba Barachana Amar Rav, that Rabba Barachana said in the name of Rav also. Firu kecheres asura, that excrement, even if it has become dried like a clay, it still is asur. Forget about the top of it drying out. Even if the whole thing has become dried like clay, it's still asur. And what is the level that's considered kecheres, that afterwards it's going to be mutar? Amar Rabba Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Barachana said, Rabbi Yochanan, kol zman shezorkah ve'ena nifrechet. So long as it's not dry enough that when you drop it, it will break to pieces. If you drop it, ve'ena nifrechet, and it doesn't crumble, it's not dry enough and still considered excrement. And it's asur.
We're concerned more about it being moist than about the odor?
There is no odor. If there is odor, that would be a problem by itself, because reach rashe sheyesh lo mekor. We spoke about that already.
How can you tell the from the urine being moist to the excrement?
Well, it's not. Well, it's absorbed in the ground, and it's not moist anymore. And yet, Geniva said it's asur so long as you can see the roshem. And the Gemara is discussing that. You want to say, well, even by excrement, if the top of it is crisp and dry, it's mutar. Now Abaye says no, you have no raya from that, because you see there is another braita in the name of Rav that says excrement, even if it's dry, until it's completely dry, so much so that you drop it and it becomes crumbled, still is asur, right? So therefore, you have no raya to disagree with Geniva for meraglayim, right? Veikadamri, let's finish this up over here. We're late. Veikadamri, kol zeman shegolelah ve'ena nifrechet. There are those who say it has to even be more dry than this, that you roll it and still it will not become crumbled. And until that moment, it is still asur. It's considered excrement. So therefore, we're going to discuss this Bezrat Hashem and what the halacha is going to be by meraglayim tomorrow morning.